This wankometron will let us know them miniature dorkloids are getting a bit too close.
The dorkoids sure hate it when we don't like and subscribe.
I reckon I'll just shoot him with this here Mauser pistol I got tucked in my waistband.
Now that there's an alien that ain't gonna kill me for not liking and subscribing to his shitty channel. He just wants to phone home. He doesn't want to take Grandpa and shove him down the fucking hole. Yeah, I wish they could all be like that instead of like them freaking miniature dorkloids. Boy, oh boy. That's a fine alien.
I'll show you to turn your back on the dark side, you treacherous old fart.
The hell's that? Oh damn, one of them.
Eat it. What's this? I hate that guy. He wouldn't know a success story if it kicked him in the nuts. I mean, hey pal, would you like to subscribe to my channel?
No, I don't reckon I'm fixing to do that.
Welcome back to Miniature Dork Universe, home of the success story. Today we are going to be making these shell craters with a stuff called polymer clay. If you're not familiar with what that is, it's a kind of putty that you can sculpt into shape, and then you put it in the oven and bake it on a reasonably low temperature for a while, and it essentially turns into a kind of plastic. And thus there's a lot of applications where we can use this kind of stuff for our gaming and hobby fun times. So in this video we're going to talk about how to work with this stuff. In this case I've made these shell craters because they are always useful on the table, and I've done a couple different kinds. These ones are 12 millimeter scale. The first ones were 15, and they look a little bit too pillowy for me, but that's because I used parchment paper to keep it from sticking, so we'll get into that later. I used a tile for the first ones that they were in 15 millimeter, and the tile, it's harder to get them off the tile after they're baked, but it's easier to sculpt them. You can get better shapes, and for these you could go way more intense with the shaping. Before we get into it, I'll just talk about crater sizes. So up here in the right hand side is, what things scale out to, and then as you see, like a 75 or 76 millimeter shell crater in 172 scale would be 1 centimeter, 1/100 would be 7 millimeters, and 144 would be 5 millimeters, and so on as you go down. 88 millimeter here is referring more to a 25 pounder and less to like the token German 88 millimeter gun, although they may have had HE shells too. This stuff here, so it's essentially a clay that you bake and it turns into a sort of plasticky type material. It says to bake it at about 110 Celsius or 230 Fahrenheit, and it's something like 15 minutes for every 6 millimeters or a quarter inch. I bake mine roughly about 20 minutes, and that seems to be enough. It's not a super hot temperature, so 20 minutes seems to be safe. You can overcook it and burn it, but it won't burn too quickly on such a low temperature. I think it can get pretty brittle too though if you overheat it, so yeah, like I said, I've done about 20 minutes and that seems to do the trick. And the thing about this stuff is you can get it in many different colors. So for making shell craters, obviously this earth brown, and I might make another color where I mix two for my sort of Mediterranean stuff that you see me working on. So I'll mix some Fimo and Sculpey and see if that mixes together. It might not. What you want to do is have like a tile. This is an old or a piece of ceramic tile. And I have used this, and it still sticks to the surface of the tile quite strong, but what I did is put the tile in the freezer, and then I ran it under hot water, and then the shell craters popped off with a little bit. I had to, they were all sort of stuck down, and I had to sort of pry them off with my thumb. I didn't reach under because you don't want to break the edges. I just pushed against them, and they broke off. And then you have this very smooth back, but it will sit fairly nicely on the table. So that's one way suggested to put them on the tile to bake them in the oven, as a way to get them free from the background that you're going to sculpt it against. And another one that I haven't tried yet is to use parchment paper such as this. Just make sure it's not waxed paper, it's got to be parchment paper. It'll melt the wax on wax paper and then end up sticking to the paper. So don't use that. Parchment is what you want. So I'm going to try a bit of both. I'm going to make a few more of these brown sort of craters for my 15 mil stuff, and then I'm going to mix up a bit of this Fimo for my 10 millimeter stuff. You'll need a few tools. They don't have to be exactly like my tools. I use these big ball bearings. One's a little bit bigger than the other. I'll use this one for my 15 millimeter craters and this one for my 10 millimeter craters. Although you could use, I don't need to use two different sizes. And I make the craters kind of different sizes anyway. And then it's as simply as putting a blob on and sticking in a ball bearing, and you can get it quite shallow. Here I've gone too shallow. You can see the Fimo underneath, so I'll start that one again. Also, you want to pinch the edges down so that you don't have like a sort of like a recurve underneath. Push that in. Still went a bit too low, but that's okay. And then round it out a bit. And then I start to shape it to look like there might be like an epicenter where the shell hit, and then some marks where shrapnel has flown up. And I'm pretty haphazard at this point how I do it, just going around sort of like so. And then I use a very rough bristle brush and just start jabbing it, and that gives it its sandy texture, and it takes some of the roughness out of your sculpting marks. I might fill in that little hole in the middle. Next time we won't press as hard. I'm just going to put a piece of the Sculpey in and just flatten it out. That actually might look good. They can all be slightly different. But that gives it a sort of earthy texture. And so the painting I did afterwards was very minimal, which is nice. It's something you can actually achieve very quickly. And so yeah, I do some a bit bigger, some a bit smaller, and I keep them away from that curved edge. And they don't have to be like perfectly round. Make sure you press them down. This thing will sort of stipple it down into the edge too. This brush is actually kind of dead. I'm going to get a different one. That one might be a bit too rough. We'll try this one. Maybe that other one was better. Try this one. I'm actually sculpting it a bit with the brush. Things like that. Once again, we're going to stick this in, round it out a bit. And start pushing that down. So you can buy things like Sculpey and Fimo at an artist supply store or a craft supply store like Michael's or something. It's fairly common stuff. Putting a few little blast marks in and then stipple, stipple, stipple. I almost take those marks right out. They're just very subtle. So I'm going to go through and put all of these on, and then we'll get on to the next step, and I'll also mix the color for my Mediterranean stuff and see how that turns out. Now I've mixed a couple different colors of railroad ballast, a couple different browns, and I'm just going to put a very small amount on each one. It's going to want to like roll into the middle, but I'm just going to sprinkle a bunch on. You can clean it up after and not waste it. So when these are done, you're not even going to have to put a base color down. It's already done. To make these I just put a bit of dry brushing on. I put a bit of a darker sort of wash in the middle, and it looks good. When there's a bunch of them together, they look legit. So with this, I'm just going to press these in and move them around a bit. And I mix some of the sand color Fimo with the brown Sculpey to get a kind of sort of lighter earth tone that I'm going to use for my Italian theater stuff. The Fimo was a different texture, so I don't know if this was because it's older or if it just has a different texture in general, but it was very flaky and I had to knead it for quite some time to get it nice and soft. And I think the Sculpty had a softer, more putty-like texture from the get-go. So yeah, I'm not sure. And it also, the Fimo says to cook this one at 230 and the other one's 275. So we're gonna see. I'll cook this one somewhere in between, like maybe 250. I'm not sure if you can actually mix these, but we're about to find out. And then if I have to suffer the treachery, that means that you won't. Your success story can ride on the back of my failure. And also, I'm pretty sure you can probably buy a color like this. I'm just mixing this because it's what I had. But as you can see, when you knead it together, you get a pretty consistent, pretty nice color. Already, I don't like how it doesn't stick as nice to the to the parchment. So we'll see how it turns out. These ones are going to be a little bit smaller. Yeah, it's harder to get it to like stick right down on the edges to get those nice sharp edges. It's going to take a bit more work. So yeah, I'm going to make a bunch of these and I'll cook them up on a slightly lighter, lower temperature, and then I'll show you how these turned out too. So these have cooled down so that I can touch it, and as you see, they stick quite well to the tile. So the way I got them off before was to stick them in the freezer for about 10-20 minutes and then run them under hot water, and then they were still stuck, but they did break off, and the backs of them were very smooth. So I'm just going to repeat that process. I've put the tan colored ones for my 12mm in the oven, and we'll see how they turn out with the mix of polymers and how they come off the parchment. I would say that it was harder to sculpt them on the parchment because they didn't stick as well. So it was a little harder to sculpt them into the shapes that I wanted. But we'll see how that worked out. Alright, these came out of the oven, and as you can see, they come off the parchment really easy. So, definitely easier to remove from the parchment, but a bit more difficult to sculpt on the parchment. So you get a little bit of this, a little bit of that. The ones on the tile are still in the freezer. But they did come off, you know, I had to pry them off a little bit. These ones that I already built, but they came off without too much issue. So I'm just going to get my flow improver. Use my flow improver mix, and then I'm going to use an eyedropper and some Mod Podge mixed with water. So I go around, I'm going to spray the whole show with some flow improver. Going to give this Mod Podge a little shake. And then I'm just going to go like mad with the eyedropper. Just giving it a little. To paint and basically finish them off, I dry brush them first, and then I make a wash that's a slightly darker color just to make the insides look a little bit more deep, maybe also a little bit burnt. So for the sort of darker brown 15mm ones, I'm going to use this Deco Art Pebble to dry brush, and then for the sort of Mediterranean 12mm stuff, I'm going to use Desert Sand. And these are colors that I'm using in my basing for those figures that go with it, so it should all sort of blend in. So yeah, I'm just going to get my brush, wipe off most of the paint, and do the old-timey dry brush. I start off with a very, very light sort of stroke, and then as the paint comes off the brush, you can start to press a little harder. And I dry brush the entire thing. A lot of these little stones are going to end up coming off, but that's okay. We don't need lots and lots. So the dry brushing's done. This got the pebble color, and the ones for my Mediterranean stuff got the sand color. And as you can see, they look quite sandy, like quite soily. That texture stippled in with the brush paints up really nicely. So now all that's left is to put a bit of a wash on the inside, a bit darker, just to make it look a bit burnt and a bit of shading. So for the Mediterranean ones, I'm going to use German camouflage medium brown. I use that with my figures for the same thing. If you've been watching the channel, you might have seen my video on the 12mm Germans. I shaded in all the shell holes that I put in with the same color. So I just put down a little bit of the paint. And then for making washes, I mix it again with that flow improver, and just watch what happens when you put the flow improver in the paint. See how it just spreads out like that? Isn't that wicked? Like that's what it's going to do on your piece too. It's really going to flow into all the areas where you want it to go. So yeah, I'm a big fan of the flow improver. I'm going to also mix in a bit of water. And then for these, I'm not going to go like too heavy duty. I have a rag handy that I'll just blot my brush every once in a while if I feel like I've got a bit too much of the wash in. And I'm just going to do like a bit of a circle around the middle and just leave it at that. It's a very quick little wash. It's very subtle, but when it dries, it's going to have a nice shading effect. And if you go overboard anywhere, just go back over it with the dry brush, and you should be good. There we have it. The shell craters are all done. So in a short period of time, I've made over 50 of them in 2 different colors for 2 different scales and theaters with very minimal painting, and they turn out looking really good as well. I think they look really good. You let me know if you think they look good, but I think they do. And so, yeah, on the battlefield, on your game table, I mean, they'll add a element of realism to any kind of warfare setting, but also as a terrain feature, this would represent rough ground as well. So, you know, it's just a nice way to represent that rough ground with some shell holes. And yeah, I guess that's all I really have to say about that. They're looking pretty good. So yeah, Fimo is a very good product for modeling. You can look at people on YouTube using Fimo to make figures, and they're even making like terrain and things like that, like houses and stuff. So I think it has a lot of applications for our particular hobby. So if any of you have used Fimo for other things in the past, let us know in the comments below. Be nice to share those ideas. But that would be this project finished. So as per usual, thank you for watching, and stay tuned. I'll be back with more success stories, because that's all I do. Although that's not surprising. I'm not going to do a video that's not a success story. I built this really shitty thing and I'm going to make a video on it. I actually should at some point. Maybe some massive failure story the next time I encounter one. Because you do from time to time. Anyway, I'll stop blabbering on. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye for now.